8 minutes to determine the difference between fantasy and reality. It sounds harder than it actually is. Hey y'all, it's Dave here from Operation Save the Earth, and this is the FukuFriday Happy Hour Hangout for February 8th, 2019. In our continuing effort to raise awareness of the victims of the ongoing Fukushima nuclear disaster in Japan, I want to highlight two very different reports I read this week about Fukushima radiation and how, in the short term at least, it affects the lives of people living in the areas deemed as difficult to return to. First, Simon Denyer from the Washington Post, of all places, put out a clear-eyed story highlighting the realities of what elders from Namie town in Japan are going through. I say of all places because, to date, the Washington Post has been one of the mainstays of what is known as the Fukushima cover-up, so it was a bit of a surprise to read. In the article, he quotes former citizens of Namie who talk about how the PR push to show that Fukushima Prefecture is rebuilding after the disaster is really hurting the people instead, pushing aside their real concerns and opportunities for solutions in favor of fulfilling some government-ordained plan instead. It's always heartbreaking to hear what it's really like to lose a home and community to an unnatural disaster like what's happening at Fukushima Daiichi, and I encourage everyone to click the links below in the comments section to read about it themselves. Farmers, fishermen, and normal, everyday people have had to endure this nightmare for almost 8 full years now, and as long as things are going the way that they are, their reality will continue to be the same, one of despair. Now, compare that to a report that was printed in The Conversation, an academia-based journalism outlet from Philip Thomas, professor of risk management at the University of Bristol, home of the Southwest Nuclear Hub, by the way. In 2017, Mr. Thomas presented the findings of a study that was funded in part by the Atomic Energy Commission of India to illustrate how evacuating after nuclear disasters is usually a waste of time and money. In the study, he asserts that because life expectancy isn't affected enough by nuclear exposure in the long term to justify the costs of mass evacuations, all it does is cause stress and psychological damage. Using some made-up algorithm from 2006, he says, you'd maybe only save a few months of extra life by moving out of an area affected by radiation exposure from a catastrophe like Chernobyl or Fukushima. Therefore, staying in place and just dealing with the fluctuating radiation rates is easier, cheaper, and causes less stress. So you may get cancer, but it won't be until you're in your 60s or 70s, and by then, who cares anyways, right?
What you talking about, Dudley?
One thing that I always like to know about people who make these kinds of assertions is if it's so cool to live in these highly radioactive areas, why don't they just move there themselves? I mean, property values in and around Chernobyl have got to be pretty cheap by now, right? Prove your thesis, Mr. Thomas. Oh, wait. He won't, nor will anyone else with sense, because that's the difference between fantasy and reality. Just because you say it's okay to live there doesn't really make it so now, does it? Just because radiation from Fukushima Daiichi in 2011 probably won't kill every elderly person left in the restricted areas of Japan doesn't mean it won't have major effects on children along the way, as we've proven over and over again. Starting a family in radioactive areas is risk-averse, period. So the fantasy says, stay in place after a nuclear accident and deal with the relatively low-risk consequences, whereas the reality shows that returning home after evacuation is next to impossible, because no one really wants to deal with all the genetic damage that said radiation can cause. Telling people to move back into or downwind of any radioactive resources is pure stupidity. But when that's what you get paid for, what do you expect? See, the Fuku fighters, I can tell you, we expect more. Okay? More compassion, more understanding, and more truth about the real consequences of radiation exposure, and we will continue to illustrate this until everyone can truly grasp the reality of the situation. And how do you do that if you haven't already, Fuku Fighters? You start learning, take step one, educate. Know more about how radiation really works. Low-dose radiation, radiation from Fukushima, radiation from Chernobyl. It's all different, and you need to understand how it affects us in different ways, and you need to take that journey for yourself. Start learning today by going to our website at operationsavetheearth.com and just click on the helpful links section, because everything you need to learn is literally right there, okay? And then when you're ready to get caught up with the rest of us, sign up for our free weekly newsletter by sending me an email at info@operationsavetheearth.com. And then don't forget to follow us on Twitter at OSTE, 8 minutes, all spelled out. That's where you get the latest Fukushima news of the week, guaranteed. Now, it's easy to sit up in an office somewhere playing with your risk model all day compared to having to euthanize a herd of cattle that you've raised since birth because of radiation exposure now, isn't it? Until the so-called academics of the world take a real hard look at things for themselves, we're stuck in PR fantasy land. At least some of those fantasies are being shattered in the mainstream media now, and as we progress forward together, let's hope that we can turn our nuclear nightmare into a thing of the past sooner rather than later. So until next time, this is Dave saying peace and good fortune to everyone. Take care till then.